He stole my identity to buy a mansion, so I reported him to the FBI. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. The bank manager looked at me with pity and asked how I planned to pay off my $3 million mortgage. I sat frozen in the stiff leather chair of the local Chase branch, staring at the middle-aged loan officer across the desk. My hands were sweating, sticking to the manila folder I had proudly brought in. I'm Liam. I'm 28 years old, I drive a 12-year-old sedan, and I work a steady job as an IT support tech, making $65,000 a year. For the last 5 years, I have lived incredibly frugally. No vacations, no expensive dinners out, just cheap coffee and ramen. Simply to save up a 20% down payment for a modest starter home. I did absolutely everything right. My credit score was a pristine 780. Mr. Gable sighed deeply, turning his computer monitor toward me so I could clearly see the glowing red numbers on the screen. Liam, your credit score is currently 412. You have a severely delinquent jumbo mortgage of $2.8 million, plus several luxury vehicle leases currently in default, and roughly $400,000 in revolving credit card debt. We can't approve you for a townhouse. Frankly, I'm surprised you aren't currently filing for bankruptcy. The room completely spun out of control. A high-pitched ringing echoed loudly in my ears. $3 million? I felt like I was suffocating. I didn't own a sprawling mansion. I didn't lease a fleet of luxury cars. I rented a cramped, 400-square-foot apartment where the heater barely worked during the winter. There has to be a mistake, I stammered, my voice cracking under the weight of the panic. Someone obviously stole my identity. That's not my debt. I swear to you. Mr. Gable offered a sad, patronizing smile. The social security number matches perfectly, Liam. The driver's license number used for the applications is yours. If this is fraud, it's the most thorough, inside job identity theft I have ever seen. I stumbled out of the bank that afternoon completely shattered. My dream of owning a home was dead. I had no idea that finding the thief would destroy my entire family forever. I didn't know my pursuit of the truth would eventually force me to sit across from federal agents. But right then, I just stared blindly at the massive numbers destroying my life. To truly understand how insane this was, you need to understand my older brother, Derek. Derek is 35, incredibly charismatic, and has never worked a normal 9-to-5 job in his entire life. While I was staying up late studying for IT networking certifications, Derek was always aggressively chasing the next big get-rich-quick scheme. Crypto startups, drop-shipping empires, offshore trading algorithms, you name it, he pitched it. For years, he was constantly broke, always asking to crash on my couch when his latest venture inevitably collapsed. Then, about 2 years ago, absolutely everything changed practically overnight. Derek suddenly started wearing tailored Italian suits and driving a custom matte black Porsche. He told the family he had finally cracked the code in commercial real estate and venture capital. At family dinners, he would toss the heavy keys to his sports car on the table and loudly order the most expensive bottles of wine. Our mother, Susan, absolutely ate it up. She had always heavily favored Derek's flashy personality over my quiet stability. "See, Liam," she would say, sipping her expensive champagne. Derek took massive risks. He manifested his success. You should really learn to step out of your comfort zone and be more like your brother. IT is fine, but it's just a paycheck. I never argued. I just nodded and quietly ate my food. When Derek bought his massive new mansion in the most exclusive gated community in our state, Mom threw him a huge celebration. I remember standing in the marble foyer of his new house, looking at the sweeping double staircases and the indoor waterfall, feeling a weird mix of jealousy and deep confusion. I couldn't understand how a guy who couldn't pay his phone bill 3 years ago was suddenly living like a tech billionaire. He didn't seem to have a physical office or actual employees, just a lot of burner phones and loud confidence. He laughed off my genuine questions, slapping me on the back and telling me I lacked the hustler mindset to grasp his complex financial structures. I assumed he just got incredibly lucky with some shady crypto investment. I had no clue his sudden fortune was directly tied to my ruined credit. Looking back at the timeline, the warning signs were flashing neon red, but I was way too naive to connect the dots. A few months before that disastrous bank appointment, genuinely bizarre things started happening. It began with the mail. I had recently updated my forwarding address, and suddenly, I started receiving thick, glossy envelopes from high-end wealth management firms and luxury lifestyle brands. They were addressed to Liam, my last name, VIP account holder. Then came the aggressive phone calls. I was sitting at my desk fixing a server issue when my cell rang. It was a collection agency. "Hi. We are calling regarding the 2-month past due balance on the 2023 Range Rover autobiography," a stern woman said. I laughed out loud. "You definitely have the wrong number. I drive a Honda that barely has a working radio." "Is this Liam?" she asked, rattling off my exact birth date and the last 4 digits of my social security number. A freezing cold chill ran down my spine, but I brushed it off. I told her it was a massive mistake and blocked the number immediately. I figured some telemarketing database had merged my info with some rich guy who happened to share my name. A week later, I got a call from a high-end landscaping company violently demanding $25,000 for custom imported palm trees. Then, a luxury pool contractor called, threatening to put a lien on my property because I hadn't paid for the infinity pool installation. Each time, they had my exact name, my phone number, and fragments of my personal data. I started losing sleep. What would you do if aggressive strangers kept demanding thousands of dollars for luxury items you've never even seen? I tried to rationally excuse it. Data breaches happen all the time, right? Maybe my info was sold on the dark web, and someone was using it to scam contractors. I decided to freeze my credit, thinking that would be the end of the nightmare. I had no idea the severe damage was already permanently etched into my financial identity. The real horror started when I finally downloaded my official credit report. Sitting entirely alone in my dark apartment, illuminated only by the harsh glow of my laptop screen, I navigated to the annual credit report website. After answering a dozen complex security questions, some of which I actually struggled with because they referenced random streets I'd never lived on and massive loans I'd never taken, the PDF finally downloaded. I opened the document, and my heart physically dropped entirely into my stomach. It was 34 pages long. My actual, legitimate credit history took up only the first page. The remaining 33 pages were a sprawling, chaotic nightmare of luxury debt. There were 6 American Express Platinum cards, all completely maxed out to the tune of $40,000 or $50,000 each. There were personal loans from boutique financial institutions I had never even heard of. But the most devastating line item was right at the top, boldly listed under the real estate holdings category. It was a jumbo mortgage issued exactly 18 months ago. Original balance, $2. 85 million. Monthly payment, $19,400. Status, severely delinquent, pending immediate foreclosure. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened painfully, and I started hyperventilating. I scrolled frantically through the dense document, desperately looking for an address. The credit report listed a primary residence that wasn't my tiny apartment. It was an address in the affluent, gated suburbs across town. The zip code was notorious for exclusively housing professional athletes, CEOs, and local celebrities. I recognized the street name instantly. It was the exact same exclusive neighborhood where my brother Derek had bought his spectacular mega mansion. My hands started shaking so violently I could barely keep the computer mouse steady. I furiously checked the exact date the mortgage was officially opened. It perfectly coincided with the month Derek threw his massive housewarming party. The same month my mother arrogantly toasted to his brilliant real estate investments. A sickening, utterly terrifying realization began to wash over me. It wasn't some random Russian hacker on the dark web who meticulously stole my identity. The thief was someone who knew my mother's maiden name, my first pet, and the exact hospital where I was born. I grabbed my keys, practically sprinting out of my apartment to find the truth. The tense drive to the address listed on my ruined credit report was an absolute blur. It was pouring rain, and my windshield wipers slapped furiously back and forth as my racing mind cycled through 1,000 terrifying scenarios. I kept desperately telling myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe Derek and I shared a lazy financial advisor who wildly messed up our files. Maybe the bank made a massive, unforgivable clerical error. But deep down, the heavy, sinking feeling in my gut told me exactly what I was going to find. I pulled up to the imposing iron gates of the Oakwood Estates community. Because I had been to Derek's house before, I clearly knew the guest code. I aggressively punched it into the keypad, the heavy metal gates slowly swinging open, granting me access to a bizarre world of manicured lawns and sweeping architectural masterpieces. I slowly navigated the winding, tree-lined streets until I reached the exact address violently stamped on the credit report. I parked my beat-up Honda across the street and just stared. There it was. A towering, modern farmhouse-style mansion with perfectly symmetrical windows and an immaculate circular driveway. It was the exact same house where I had stood in the marble foyer sipping cheap beer while my brother celebrated his overwhelming success. Parked right in the dead center of the driveway was Derek's custom, matte black Porsche. I sat in my freezing cold car, rain drumming loudly on the roof, feeling entirely hollowed out. My own brother. The guy I shared a bunk bed with growing up. The guy who used to steal my allowance when we were kids had somehow graduated to stealing my entire future. He had selfishly used my pristine credit score, my incredibly clean background, and my stolen social security number to construct a fake financial profile capable of buying a multi-million-dollar estate. I watched the warm lights turn on in the massive living room. I could see the faint silhouette of someone moving around comfortably inside. He was sitting in luxury, wrapped safely in the warmth of a stolen life, while I was being viciously hunted by debt collectors and denied a simple townhouse. My sadness rapidly evaporated, replaced by a dark, consuming rage I had never felt before. I didn't storm up to the house and confront Derek that night. Walking up to his heavy wooden door screaming would have immediately tipped my hand. And if he was capable of this massive level of calculated fraud, he was absolutely capable of destroying the evidence. I needed ironclad proof. The next morning, I called in sick to work, brewed a massive pot of black coffee, and turned my small dining table into a chaotic war room. First, I went straight to the county clerk's online database. Public property records are a massive goldmine if you know exactly what to look for. I searched the Oakwood Estates address. The property wasn't listed directly under Derek's name, nor was it directly under mine. It was securely owned by an opaque entity called Apex Holdings LLC. I pulled the state business registry data for Apex Holdings. My jaw clenched tightly as I read the corporate filings. The LLC was quietly registered 18 months ago. The legally listed managing director? Liam, my last name. The registered address was a private P.O. box located downtown. Next, I paid a small fee to download the actual county deed stamps and the original mortgage agreement heavily attached to the property. As I scrolled slowly to the final page of the PDF, I felt physically sick. There, on the primary signature line, was my exact name. It was an obvious, incredibly sloppy forgery. The distinct loops of the L and the M looked exactly like Derek's rushed handwriting. He hadn't just sneakily used my social security number. He had actively sat down in front of a notary, probably a deeply corrupt one he paid off with cash, and boldly signed my name to a $3 million legal document. He had legally bound me as the sole personal guarantor for the LLC's massive, crushing debts. What kind of sociopath willingly does that to their own flesh and blood? Every time he patted my back and told me to hustle harder, he was secretly laughing directly at me. He was wearing my clean financial skin like a custom suit. I printed every single document, neatly organizing them into a thick binder. Armed with undeniable truth, I decided to visit the person who always protected him. I drove aggressively to my mother's house, my knuckles completely white on the steering wheel. Susan, our mother, lived in a very comfortable suburban home that Derek had generously paid off for her last year. I walked right through her front door without knocking, throwing the heavy binder violently onto her kitchen island. The incredibly loud smack made her jump, spilling her morning tea. Liam, what on earth is wrong with you? She gasped, clutching her robe tightly. Derek completely stole my identity, I said, my voice utterly dead and emotionless. He used my social security number, forged my signature, and bought his mansion in my name. I'm $3 million in debt, Mom. My entire life is ruined. I waited for the shock. I waited for her to burst into tears, to scream in horror, to instinctively call the police. Instead, she just stared down at the binder, her face turning slightly pale, and then she let out a long, deeply exhausted sigh. She didn't look surprised. She just looked incredibly annoyed. Mom, I whispered, the brutal realization hitting me like a freight train. You knew. She refused to meet my eyes. Liam, please don't be so dramatic. Your brother had some bad marks on his credit, and he just needed a tiny little boost to get his business off the ground. He told me he was just borrowing your good standing for a few months. He promised he was going to transfer it all cleanly to his name once the business settled. Borrowing my good standing, I yelled, finally losing my temper completely. He forged my signature on federal documents. I can't buy a house. I'm getting calls from collection agencies. He's your brother, she snapped back loudly, finally looking at me with fierce, unwavering defense. He's successful now. Do you know what a scandal would do to him? To me? If you go to the police, you'll ruin his entire life. Just give him time to pay it off. Take the hit for the family, Liam. I stared at the woman who raised me, realizing she viewed me entirely as collateral damage to fuel her favorite son's ego. That was the exact moment my loyalty to my family completely died. Leaving my mother's house, I felt a cold, incredibly calculated clarity wash over me. They genuinely expected me to simply absorb millions of dollars in fraudulent debt and quietly accept financial ruin just to keep up shiny appearances at the country club. I drove straight back to my apartment and dove much deeper into the LLC's financial footprints. If Derek was wildly defaulting on his mortgage and his luxury cars, where was all the money actually going? What exactly was his brilliant business? I spent the next 2 excruciating days tracking down public court records and heavily cross-referencing the angry contractors who had been aggressively harassing me. I quickly discovered something that escalated the situation from simple identity theft to a massive, terrifying federal nightmare. Derek wasn't just living way beyond his means. He was running an active, multi-million-dollar wire fraud scheme. He was aggressively soliciting investments for high-yield commercial real estate portfolios under the fake guise of Apex Holdings LLC. He would take hundreds of thousands of dollars from wealthy, gullible investors, promising huge returns. But he wasn't buying commercial properties at all. He was illegally funneling the cash straight into his personal accounts to pay for his Porsche, his designer suits, and his massive mansion. It was a classic Ponzi scheme, safely wrapped in an LLC. And the most utterly terrifying part? Because my name and my social security number were the only ones legally attached to the LLC, I was essentially the sole fall guy. When the Ponzi scheme inevitably collapsed, the angry investors wouldn't sue Derek. They would absolutely sue me. When the IRS came aggressively looking for taxes on the stolen millions, they would audit me. Derek had carefully insulated himself, leaving absolutely no paper trail connecting him to the crimes. He had built a massive financial bomb, strapped it tightly to my chest, and was gleefully holding the detonator. If I just filed a simple police report for identity theft, local cops would be hopelessly overwhelmed. Derek would hire expensive lawyers and effortlessly twist the narrative, claiming we were equal business partners and I mismanaged the funds. I needed someone with the power to completely bypass local corruption and crush him instantly. The very next morning, I didn't go anywhere near the local police precinct. Instead, I drove directly downtown to the imposing federal building. Walking through the metal detectors and handing my ID to the armed federal guards felt incredibly surreal. I asked to speak to someone in the white-collar crime division. After a grueling 3-hour wait in a sterile, windowless room, the heavy door finally opened. In walked Special Agent Miller. She was in her late 40s, wearing a sharp, no-nonsense pantsuit, firmly carrying a thick yellow notepad. She sat across from me, her sharp eyes scanning my exhausted face. "All right, Liam. You forcefully said you have hard evidence of a multi-million-dollar wire fraud operation. Walk me through it." I slowly slid my heavy binder across the cold metal table. For the next 2 solid hours, I explained absolutely everything. I showed her the forged deed, the fake LLC documents, the maxed-out credit reports, and the messy trails of investor money flowing directly into the fraudulent accounts. Agent Miller flipped silently through the pages, her expression shifting from polite skepticism to grim fascination. "This is incredibly brazen," she muttered quietly, tapping her pen violently against the forged signature. "If what you're showing me is completely accurate, your brother has actively committed federal bank fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. But Liam, I desperately need you to understand something very clearly." She leaned in, her intense eyes locking onto mine. If we officially open this case, there is absolutely no going back. We don't do family counseling. We don't negotiate apologies. We meticulously build a case, we raid the property, and we put him in federal prison for a very long time. Are you absolutely prepared to do that to your own brother? What would you do if your own mother told you to accept bankruptcy for your brother's sake? I thought about my cramped apartment. I thought about the modest house I couldn't buy. I thought about Mom's dismissive sigh. They had already made their selfish choice. Now, it was time to make mine. I looked Agent Miller dead in the eye and agreed to help tear him down. The FBI inherently moves incredibly slowly until they suddenly move very fast. While Agent Miller's specialized team quietly subpoenaed bank records and began discreetly verifying the massive investor fraud, I was strictly instructed to act completely normal. I had to convincingly pretend I was still the clueless, broke younger brother who knew absolutely nothing about the impending doom. That became incredibly difficult when I heard a loud, obnoxiously confident knock on my apartment door on a random Tuesday evening. I looked through the peephole, and my heart instantly hammered against my ribs. It was Derek. I slowly opened the door, forcefully faking a confused smile. He arrogantly barged right in, wearing a ridiculously expensive cashmere coat, looking around my tiny living room with a bizarre mixture of pity and disgust. "Hey, little bro. Just thought I'd casually drop by and check on the peasant quarters," he joked loudly, slapping me hard on the shoulder. I offered him a water, desperately trying to keep my hands from shaking. Derek sat heavily on my cheap sofa and leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. "So, Mom mentioned you randomly stopped by the other day. Said you were acting. Stressed. Everything strictly good with you? Any weird financial hiccups popping up?" He was definitely fishing. He absolutely knew the mansion mortgage was severely delinquent, and he was aggressively trying to gauge if the bank had officially contacted me yet. Just the usual grind. I lied smoothly, forcing a heavy sigh. Work is totally exhausting. My old car desperately needs new brakes, and I honestly can't really afford it right now. You know how it is. Derek smiled, a wide, deeply predatory grin. He reached elegantly into his coat pocket, pulled out a massive, thick money clip, and slowly peeled off 5 crisp $100 bills, tossing them casually onto my coffee table. "Here, get the brakes fixed today. I always take care of my blood, Liam. Remember that. We're strictly family. We protect each other, right?" The sheer audacity of the gesture made me actively want to vomit. He was tipping me $500 with the very money he had violently stolen by destroying my life. I swallowed my rage, thanked him profusely, and walked him to the door. As soon as his Porsche peeled out of my lot, my burner phone began ringing. "We have a problem." Agent Miller's voice crackled through the secure phone line. "We've traced the LLC accounts and found the forged documents, but Derek used an encrypted server to communicate with the corrupt notary. We have a massive paper trail, but a highly paid defense attorney might try to spin this to a jury. They could argue that you willingly authorized him to use your identity as a silent partner. We need a definitive, recorded confession. We need him to admit, out loud, that he stole your identity and forged your signature without your permission." That was how I found myself sitting nervously in the back of an unmarked FBI surveillance van 3 days later, awkwardly lifting my shirt while a federal technician taped a tiny, highly sensitive microphone directly to my chest. It felt completely surreal. My hands were trembling violently. The plan was brilliantly simple, but incredibly risky. I had invited Derek to an obscenely expensive steakhouse downtown under the fake pretense of celebrating his massive success and finally asking him for a job. Agent Miller knew Derek's massive ego was his biggest vulnerability. If I stroked his vanity and played the helpless younger brother, he wouldn't be able to resist bragging. I walked slowly into the dimly lit, crowded restaurant, sweating profusely through my button-down shirt. Derek was already seated comfortably at a luxurious corner booth, loudly ordering a $200 bottle of Cabernet from the waiter. 2 undercover federal agents were subtly sitting 3 tables away, blending in perfectly as a normal couple on a dinner date. "Little bro," Derek beamed as I sat down. "Glad you finally want to step up to the big leagues. What changed your mind?" I took a deep breath, perfectly reciting the exact script Agent Miller had ruthlessly drilled into my head. I see how you live, Derek. The house, the cars. But honestly, I'm totally terrified. I checked my credit report yesterday. There's a $3 million mortgage on it. The bank says it's for your house. Derek's arrogant smile vanished instantly. His eyes darted nervously around the bustling restaurant. The temperature at the table completely dropped 10 degrees. He aggressively leaned across the table, his face inches from mine, and lowered his voice to a menacing whisper. I prayed the hidden microphone was picking up every single word he was about to say. "Keep your voice down." Derek hissed violently, his charismatic mask completely slipping away to vividly reveal the cold, deeply calculating fraudster beneath. "Who else have you randomly talked to about this? Did you stupidly call the bank? Did you talk to Mom?" "Just Mom." I lied perfectly, my voice shaking completely naturally from the sheer adrenaline. "Derek, I'm completely ruined. I tried to genuinely get a mortgage for a tiny townhouse, and I got brutally denied. Why is my name legally on your house? Why are my details heavily plastered on your LLC?" Derek scoffed arrogantly, heavily rolling his eyes as if my entirely ruined life was merely a minor, annoying inconvenience to his day. "Oh, genuinely grow up, Liam. Your credit was just sitting there, completely unused. You were never going to actually do anything big with it anyway." I desperately needed a clean social security number to completely bypass the jumbo loan restrictions and safely secure the investor funds. I happily paid a guy $2,000 to stamp the fake notary seal on the deed. Forging your signature was literally the easiest part. I've been doing it since we were stupid kids on our report cards. He took a calm, incredibly satisfying sip of his expensive wine. "Look, the business is genuinely in a slight cash flow crunch right now. I missed a few meaningless payments. Big deal. Just keep your mouth strictly shut, confidently take the hit on your credit for a couple of years, and I'll happily throw you $50,000 when my next massive development deal closes. If you idiotically go to the cops, you'll completely destroy our family, and Mom will never forgive you." He had brilliantly just handed me absolutely everything. Clear motive, exact method, and an outright, undeniable admission of aggressive forgery and fraud. He admitted to stealing my social security number. He admitted to explicitly bribing a notary. It was all crystal clear, beautifully captured in high-definition audio by the federal device safely taped to my sternum. I looked at my brother, feeling a strange sense of profound emptiness. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt completely disconnected from him. "You're totally right, Derek," I said quietly, slowly standing up from the table. "Mom will never forgive me." Before he could process what I truly meant, I walked straight out of the restaurant, leaving him with the massive bill. Less than 48 hours later, the federal government came knocking on his custom oak door. It was exactly 6 a.m. on a freezing Thursday when Agent Miller aggressively authorized the strike. I wasn't there to actually see it in person, but Miller gladly showed me the incredible surveillance footage later. 3 armored black SUVs aggressively rolled up to the imposing iron gates of Oakwood Estates. They didn't politely punch in the guest code. They efficiently used a heavy hydraulic ram to rip the massive gate completely off its expensive hinges. Dozens of heavily armed federal agents immediately swarmed the perfectly manicured lawns. They aggressively breached the heavy double doors of the megamansion, intensely flooding the pristine marble foyer. Derek was forcefully dragged out into his grand circular driveway wearing absolutely nothing but expensive silk pajamas and heavy steel handcuffs. The custom matte black Porsche was immediately loaded safely onto a flatbed tow truck. Federal agents methodically carried out massive boxes of forged documents, illegal burner phones, and encrypted hard drives strictly containing the damning ledgers of his massive Ponzi scheme. My cell phone rang violently at 7:30 a.m. It was my mother. I slowly answered, and she was already completely hysterical, screaming so incredibly loudly the phone's audio distorted wildly. "What did you do?" she shrieked intensely. "Derek is securely in jail. The FBI just raided his entire house. They aggressively took absolutely everything. You completely called the police on your own brother? How could you be so incredibly selfish?" "He's a violent criminal, Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm amidst her massive chaos. "He entirely stole $3 million directly in my name. He deeply defrauded investors. He was gladly going to let me blindly go to federal prison for his crimes. He is literally family," she sobbed aggressively into the speaker. "You fix this entirely right now? You explicitly call them and loudly tell them it was a huge misunderstanding. or you are completely dead to me forever." I tightly held the phone to my ear, silently listening to the toxic venom actively pouring out of the woman who was supposedly supposed to protect me. She wasn't grieving a misunderstanding. She was fiercely mourning the massive loss of her wealthy lifestyle and the absolute illusion of her golden child. "I completely can't fix it," I said softly, "and I genuinely don't want to." I hung up the phone, blocked her number permanently, and stared blindly out the window of my tiny apartment. The family nightmare was over, but the war to reclaim my identity was just beginning. Successfully sending my deceitful brother to federal prison did not magically erase the $3 million in fraudulent debt overnight. The intense legal fallout was an absolutely exhausting, truly agonizing marathon. With Agent Miller's official FBI fraud reports heavily backing me up, I had to successfully hire a sharp lawyer to systematically dispute every single fake account. I spent countless, depressing hours sitting quietly in sterile bank offices, signing massive sworn affidavits, and forcefully sending certified legal letters to aggressive collection agencies who still desperately tried to violently hound me for Derek's unpaid luxury contractors. It took 14 completely excruciating months to finally untangle my clean name from the toxic Apex Holdings LLC mess. I will genuinely never forget the exact morning I carefully logged into my banking app and proudly saw my credit score tick back gracefully over 750. I sat heavily on my cheap couch and cried intensely. It was a profound, completely overwhelming wave of pure relief. I successfully had my actual name back. I finally had my entire future back. As for the family, the deep fracture was absolute and completely permanent. Derek quickly pled guilty to intense federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft simply to avoid a massive, embarrassing trial. He was heavily sentenced to 9 rigorous years in federal prison. My mother completely cut me out of her life entirely, exactly as she viciously threatened. She still happily visits him every single weekend, utterly convinced that I am the malicious villain who aggressively destroyed his supposedly brilliant business empire out of sheer jealousy. I honestly haven't spoken to her in well over 2 years, and frankly, my mental health has truly never been better. I successfully started actively seeing a therapist to fully process the deep, cutting emotional betrayal. When the people who strictly share your blood actively view you as nothing more than an exploitable resource, it deeply damages your fundamental ability to trust anyone. But I slowly learned to strictly establish ironclad boundaries. I truly realized that actual family isn't successfully defined by shared DNA. It's completely defined by mutual respect, extreme honesty, and unconditional support. Looking deeply back at the absolute wreckage my brother selfishly left behind, I thoroughly learned a harsh but necessary lesson about money, wild pride, and the extremely dark side of human greed. The grand mansion that started this whole nightmare met a very fitting, poetic end. Derek's stolen, incredibly flashy mega mansion didn't quietly stay empty for long. Because the massive jumbo mortgage was entirely fraudulent and illegally secured by stolen investor funds, the bank forcefully foreclosed on the property almost immediately. I drove slowly past the Oakwood Estates neighborhood a few months later just to successfully find a true sense of final closure. The perfectly manicured grass was already actively turning brown and dying. The grand circular driveway was completely empty, and a massive, incredibly ugly bank-owned foreclosure sign was hammered aggressively right into the front lawn. His flashy empire was nothing but a fragile, toxic illusion built entirely on my broken back, and the exact moment the undeniable truth was fully exposed to the bright light, it completely crumbled to absolute dust. Today, my personal life is beautifully quiet, and I wouldn't successfully trade it for all the massive luxury estates in the entire world. I finally closed successfully on that modest, comfortable 2-bedroom townhouse I had been rigorously saving up for over the years. It definitely doesn't have a ridiculous indoor waterfall, an expensive private theater, or an imposing, heavy iron gate, but the property title is completely and legally in my actual name, and the true peace of mind that brings is absolutely priceless. I proudly still drive my old Honda Civic, and I easily sleep perfectly soundly every single night, knowing I absolutely don't owe anyone a single fraudulent dime. If you somehow take anything clearly away from my horrific nightmare, forcefully let it be this extremely practical piece of advice. Strongly protect your personal data exactly like your life depends on it, because financially, it absolutely does. Actively freeze your entire credit securely at all 3 major bureaus right now. Do not naively wait for a massive red flag or a weird, aggressive collection call. It fully takes 5 minutes online and is entirely free. Never foolishly assume that your vital information is perfectly safe just because it's strictly only shared with your immediate family members. Sometimes, the people who are closest to you are precisely the ones most totally willing to illegally sell your future to blindly fund their own narcissistic delusions. Blood might medically make you relatives, but fierce loyalty, complete honesty, and basic human decency are what actually successfully make you true family. If someone selfishly demands you aggressively set yourself on fire just to strictly keep them incredibly warm, you absolutely have every fundamental right to successfully walk away completely. I sent my brother to federal prison to protect my future, and I don't regret it.